Okay, we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order of the Budget and Finance Committee. Thanks everyone for being here. Is there anyone on the phone? Okay, so it's just us. Should we start with introductions? Cameron?
Sure, Cameron Perez-Rodillo.
Crystal Kennedy.
Pete Peterson.
Meg Salato.
Felix Rivera.
Austin Wood-Davidson.
Lance Wilbur.
Alex Slipka.
Fred Dyson.
Okay, and we have a bunch of folks in the audience, including people from BAC and from the administration. Maybe they could just introduce themselves if they want to talk. That's fine. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start with 3A and get an update on the 2019 and 2020 budgets from Lance.
All right, thank you, Chair. So I'll start with the 2019 budget. On Tuesday night, you will, in your packet, on an informational report, you will have the October, as of the end of October's, the end of how we're doing our budget to actuals spend. It doesn't have the projections in there, so that report, I'm going to highlight a little bit of that for you. In that report, you will have how departments are doing in their labor, their non-labor, their overtime, and their travel. As at the end of October, we were 83% through the end of the year. The our labor budget was about 81% spent in totality, and our non-labor budget was about 82% spent in totality of all of the departments. So in general government, where we are
At the end of October. And so how much percent of that? That's
83%.
Oh, okay.
So if you take the labor and the non-labor on spent to date, the actuals that they have, they're underspending. When you include their encumbrances, we're pretty close to right on at the end of October. The November month-end close will happen, I think, this Friday or Monday, so that will help us put the November report together. And then we are also working on year-end projections. We needed some information from a couple key departments that we got some yesterday and some earlier today. But on the projection side, when you look at all of the general government, it does appear that we are going to be positive a little bit. And I'm really anxious to see how that is going to turn out. I mean, obviously we know that the fire department will be over. Their numbers are getting better and better every week, every month. And right now the number appears to be around 3 million over. The police department will also be over a little bit due to overtime, and we talked about that before, primarily in the dispatch area. We're aware of that. But street maintenance is also looking pretty good. Parks, surprisingly, has looked pretty good. And one of the reasons is that as a result of the earthquake, they were not able to open facilities as early in the year as they had expected. Until those things got done, they didn't turn those things on. And so they saved some money in sort of seasonal labor, which helped us out a lot. So it's coming together. And I think, for 2019, between how departments have been managing the money that they have, the way in which we're getting close to the year, and assuming our revenues come in as we had predicted, including all of our grant revenues and reimbursements, I think we're going to be very close. So for some reason, if those grant revenues don't come in on time before we close the year, we will spend our cash, and that will consume our fund balance, but those grants will come in 2020, so then we will adjust in 2020. So right now, the spend is looking pretty good overall for all of the departments, and for those departments that are running hot, we'll make supplemental adjustments in January, probably February. And that's kind of where we are in 19.
Mr. Constant has joined us. Anybody have any questions about that?
For 2020, thank you.
Before you go to that, could you just talk about the fire department closures and what's going on with that? Or maybe Mr. Falsey wants to.
I think I'll let Mr. Falsey manage those.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So when we last spoke about this at the Assembly meeting, 3 meetings ago, we said there are no more fire dollars to appropriate to the fire department. That is true. We also said that over the course of the summer, we did the thing that we occasionally do, is we let a department run over its budget, and it starts eating into the cash pool. It starts taking someone else's dollars, which is something in the nature of a loan. And we allowed ourselves to do that because we had this wildly dry, wildly hot fire season, and for public safety reasons, we just felt like it was the only course to go. There's a limit to that approach because we also don't let that happen in a way that starts to eat into our overall fund balance savings. So if you look just at 2019, we would say, is the fire department's overage eating into other folks' budgets? Yes, it is. Is it causing the whole of 2019 to go negative? And at the time, it wasn't, but when we hit October, our best understanding was, yes, it was. And so that's it. There's no fire dollars, there's no any kind of dollars. Time to pump the brakes. We had the very projected discussion at the assembly chambers. You heard what the assembly was advising us. That Friday, after that Tuesday meeting, was the first signal we got from the OMB exercise that actually it looks like we are going to end the year in a slightly positive position. $500 million budget will be less than 1% positive, but it will be a little bit positive according to our best understanding. At that point, we said, okay, we're willing to go back to the posture we were in the summer. So we have not had any rolling closures since Thursday after that Tuesday assembly meeting, 3 assembly meetings ago. I suspect that's where we are going to be for the rest of the year. If we had a huge market correction and suddenly 2019 is also going to end in the red, we would be reevaluating, but my best prediction now is that we have turned that policy off effective the Thursday after that meeting 3 meetings ago, and it is not likely to come back on before the year is over.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. Mr. Paxton?
I just say thank you.
We really appreciate that. Mr. Dyson?
Yeah, let the record reflect that the assembly actually has some influence in administration, which I appreciate.
Yeah, thank you, Meg, for bringing that forward. Any other questions until we go to 2020?
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
So
Vince.
I'd just like to start by thanking the Assembly for your support on all of the budgets, not only the operating, but the utilities and all of the work that you guys and the efforts that you put into that. A lot of questions came to us sort of at the end of the day, and had a lot of help from Bill and Ona and Jason and Chris. And so anyway, I just want to thank you guys for the help that you gave OMB to make that successful, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
The one of the benefits that we had for the first time is the complete working of our SAP financial pieces. We were literally able to load the budget within 6 minutes after we had it all said and done. We did some checking. Normally that would take us 3 days. So once we verified that what was all the amendments that you made and checked all of that stuff and loaded it into the system, I mean, it's all parked and ready to go. So on January 1st, when the departments are ready to go, procurement's ready to take place, they're ready to make it work on their operating and their capital of all the utilities. So that was helpful for us. A lot of efficiencies and a lot of less time spent.
So there's something positive we can share about SAP?
Yeah, it's a good thing. It's a very good thing. So that's all I have for the budgets. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Any other questions before we go to B? Okay, Mr. Slifka, you want to lead us through the MOA financial status update?
Sure, I'm going to start actually by having our treasurer, Peter Moore, give you an update on revenue, which I think you distributed a copy of this month.
Okay, hello. So I'll just make it really brief here. There's a handout you all have. It's 3 pages. And what it shows is the overall projected revenue for this year is $1.6 million in the positive. And this is for all the general government 100 funds. That also does include the permit office. So, and they do have a little bit of a negative projected year-end number. There is a report coming to you all next Tuesday on the 17th. And that report is going to be just slightly different from this, just because it was a timing thing, getting it in pace and to you. So this is what you see today is the most current. It's as within the last day or two. And the most recent update we had was to the investment earnings. That is something, if you recall in past presentations, it has been going up and down month to month, big swings, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So in the most recent period, it was off $400,000 from what we previously projected. Overall, though, for the year, it's within $51,000 of the budget. So just to very much summarize how this year it looks like it's going to end up revenue-wise, there's 2 major negative revenues. One is tobacco tax, $800,000 negative. And the other is municipal assistance, which you all know about. That's $1.5 million negative. To offset that, there are 4 major positives. And those positives are in property tax. There's a variance there that's in the positive. Room tax, as you may have heard, came in very, very strong this year. APD traffic fines are also above budget. And then there's something called prior year expense recovery. And that one is primarily reflected to the tier 4 of the PERS system. If workers come into that system and they don't stay long enough, then they forfeit what they have contributed. The municipality as an employer gets back its contributions if they have invested. So that ends up being sort of a return of an expense to us, and that's what it does show up in this report.
Can I stop you, Dan, and just note that Mr. Weddleton joined for the record and Cameron has a question.
And that's all I have for summary.
Oh, okay.
I'm getting lost in the language, and maybe just because I'm new, the positive, negative, both in terms of revenue and expenditures, we're using the term positive and negative.
Okay.
Can you help me understand, is a positive means that we did not spend as much as we thought, and then a positive in terms of revenue, we earned more than we thought?
Yeah,
Is
and
that okay?
I'm sorry if I confuse anything. Yeah, when I talk about revenues, it is a positive statement to say our revenues are coming in at or above what was budgeted for revenues.
Okay.
So that's a positive. I think on the expense side, it's your expenses are less than what you thought you would spend.
Okay.
So yeah, it does get confusing if you word that. Use the word positive in both sides.
Okay. I think I assume that. I just want to make sure. Okay.
And Mr. Dyson, you had a question?
What does counter fines mean?
Counter fines means they're traffic fines that the police department issues, and the reason they're called counter fines is because they're the timely paid fines that are paid at the counter at the police department. So it's basically the most
I got it.
current set of fines that are paid. There are delinquent fines that are a whole other world there.
And I haven't checked for a few months, but we were not able to do that online.
Oh, you can, yeah, you can do it. Mhm.
No, well, you weren't, because they were
Okay.
overwhelmed and they weren't
Okay.
able to get it entered.
Oh, okay.
And so on, but maybe you'd want to in the future put online and counter fines.
Okay.
because, hopefully a lot of people are paying.
Okay.
So the DUWI impounds,
Mhm. That was,
I just,
go ahead.
yeah, should we be making money on that? I mean, above what we expend?
I don't know what, my guess is you're not covering your costs, but these are fines that are set in code for specific violations, and it's a reflection of the amount of enforcement. So enforcement is up, and that's why this is above budget. But I don't know on the costs.
All right, and administrative fees, or do we by code ask that be self-supporting?
I can ask Lance about that. I presume so. I mean, that's usually the theory.
I mean, Jackson, let me check.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't care, Grief.
I'll find out.
I'd like to know what we're aiming at.
Okay.
Yeah, I suspect we'd want to aim at least at being self-supporting, that whole program. But that's a detail, we can talk about it later. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Dyson. I have a quick question, and then I'll go to Cameron and Pete. So, with property taxes, why would it vary so much? I mean, we know how many people there are generally. We know how much they owe. Is it just whether they pay it, or how?
No, it doesn't have anything to do with whether they pay. It's how much, it's what you set the mill rate at, what the estimated valuations were at the time you set mill rate.
Okay.
And then that ultimately computes to the tax bill. The valuations literally change every day of the year. There are always some reason to change valuations. They're just little incremental changes, but it happens. Then we have some situations like this year. We just learned a week ago or so that the McKay building, you know, the pink building, I don't know what color it is today, but there is some, I think, HUD financing going on, refinancing, where they're going to pay us $700,000 of back taxes. We just learned that a week ago. So that is unexpected. It's not something we would have budgeted for, and that creates a positive revenue situation.
And just as a quick follow-up, so you said the values are changing every day, but we have an assessment office that values what individual property taxes are due for the year, so those
Right.
aren't changing daily.
They're not, but they, I don't know, do you want to weigh in
I
on
guess I
this?
can explain. So remembering when property taxes, your assessment comes to you early in the year, and you have the opportunity to contest it. And so when Dan says those are changing, remember that this was the year where we had 700 appeals, twice the number we had the year before. A lot of those were related to earthquake. So a lot of those appeals were happening at the exact same time that we were setting the mill rate. So we set the mill rate based on our best guess of what those appeals would result in. And as it turns out, the net result is we had less reduction in valuation than we had expected, which is why this turned into a positive in terms of how much.
That makes sense. I mean, that doesn't answer the question about daily
And I should
evaluation,
just
but,
add to that.
but I agree with you. So normally we wouldn't
Yeah.
have this big of a variance in a typical year.
I mean, remembering that, you know, it's $550,000 in property taxes and we're off by 0.5%.
Yeah,
I mean, that's not bad.
right, but normally it would be even lower because we wouldn't have
In any given year, you're going to have.
Historically, I'd say plus or minus 2 million is reasonable
Okay.
for the city's history. I will say that the city does a lot of audits, so we audit exemption programs, that's on the property appraisal side. The personal property group does audits, and in the process of that, we may discover where value needs to come back on or may need to go off. So it literally gets looked at every single day, and those decisions end up affecting that individual property's value as those decisions are made. So
Okay.
that's what I meant.
Thanks.
And I guess I'll add to that 2 things that you can expect. One, that last week we sent out notices to over 1,000 residents who are over 65 who are not taking advantage of the senior exemption, reminding them that you can save $2,400 on your taxes if you apply for the senior exemption, which you're eligible for.
Wow, that was generous.
Well, I mean, they're eligible for it. I mean, we are, so there's 2 sides to that. So we did that, and so we expect that hopefully we'll see some people taking advantage of that. The flip side of that is there is similar to a higher number that probably should not be getting the residence exemption. And so we are going to, you approve the budget to staff up for those people to go after and recapture those taxes. So there's going to be a lot of movement in property tax in 2020. And again, so you could very easily see similar levels of differential.
Got it. Thanks, Alex. Cameron is next.
Yeah, just another clarifying question. The variances that you're listing out here are compared to the budget based on this point in time or based on the total?
It's based on the annual budget that was set at the time first quarter budget occurred.
Okay, but that's what I'm trying to figure out. Is this variance based on, I mean, is this a normal variance because we have not finished the year? Or
No,
is this
no,
a variance
we are
based
projecting
on-
through the end of the year.
Right.
So we're saying there's a 12-month budget set at first quarter, and we're saying we have 11 months of actual data, and we work with the department and say, what do you think that final month will
So
be?
this is a projection through the end of the
It
year?
is, it
I
is.
see,
It's
I see.
pro forma through the.
Based
through all
on what
12
you know,
months.
based on what you
Yeah.
know now,
Mhm.
this is your
Yeah.
projection.
Yeah, and it gets obviously more and more accurate as we
Right.
get closer to the
Of course,
end of the year.
makes-
Yeah.
yeah.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was wondering if the reduction in the rental vehicle tax could be connected to the negative amount of motor fuel tax that we're collecting. If they're renting fewer cars, they're buying less fuel, or
I'm not aware of that kind of correlation. I know there is a lot of price volatility season to season, and so we've had years where it's been, like last year where we had fuel tax, it was up. This year it's down, so I think it's more driven by the market price more than the cost of fuel. So.
okay, thank you.
I would observe that you're probably going to see early in 2020 is some proposed ordinances from us to get more aggressive around the rental vehicle platforms in the same way that we did with Airbnb. We have had conversations with the airport where they have identified, I believe, over 200 unique individual people who are running Turo, which is you don't rent a car, it's a private rental car type place. And so that can have a very large impact on the amount of rental vehicle fees that we collect. So we're going to ask your approval to do the same thing and mandate that the platforms report that information to us so that we can help the airport solve their issue as well as our own.
Is that where individuals rent their cars out? Is that
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Dyson and then Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thank you. On the appraisal subject, this is suggestion for the future for the budget. So certainly been some, in the past, you can make a strong case that there were large developers who talked the city into giving huge tax holidays for long-term projects some of them pretty major, you know, it's, the 2 or 3 I know about, nothing really came of it, you know, and I'm told that some of these almost scams or still have the tax holiday, you know, and so on and so forth. And so it might be interesting to have our appraisal folks look at some of those old long-term deals and see if there's some issues we can learn from and some things that need to be fixed. And back in the day, there was correlation between who got those and campaign contributions. I have nothing in the last decade about that. But and I suspect we might use, and we've got some really good people in the appraisal department, and we may want to use our audit capacity if we can find something. Thank you.
Yeah. Mr.
I guess
Swanson, did you want
I
to say
would-
anything about that?
I will work with you to understand exactly which developments you're talking about, because I'm not aware of anything like that is
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah, good.
We certainly wouldn't condone anything that.
Oh, and there's nothing I've known about the current administrations whatsoever. It's old stuff.
So maybe you guys can talk
Talk
offline
offline.
and then let us know if it makes sense to bring it up to the group. with Mr.
And
Nisbet.
I've got some stuff from citizens,
Okay.
and those citizens are very consistent in not being credible.
We're gonna miss you. Mr. Constant, okay, he'll pass. I think that's it then?
Well, so I wanted to try to frame what you've heard today. So you've heard from Lance that expenditures are running below budget, and we'll say that number we might end spending $3 million less. You've heard that from the revenue side, we might end up capturing maybe 1.6 more million in revenue than we had budgeted for, so that gets us to, we'll call it a $5 million number. Remember that is offset from a fund balance perspective with the $8 million in earthquake that we have spent but not yet been reimbursed for. Another item that is on your agenda for next week is $3 million for transit, this item 5307. It is unlikely that we get that money this year. They have already spent that money. So those two are $11 million negative. So, you know, irrespective of the fact that everybody has done a good job, and from the aspect of trying to not spend as much as we've taxed for, because of those items, we are most likely, you're going to see when we report fund balance near the end of March, that it will in fact be significantly negative, which is why we asked for approval of the exception to our fund balance policy.
Mr. Weddleton?
Because we also have the budget problem with the fire department. Some of that go
But that assumes the calculation that Alex mentioned about at the end of all general government, we ended up positive 3.
Oh, including
That
that
assumes
too?
the fire department's at a negative 3.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's very good news then. The
Well, I wouldn't say
507. Well, that's amazing. If that had not happened, to be certainly for everybody to watch their costs so much to have that.
I'm very proud of the departments for
Pretty
doing that. I
impressive,
mean, we
yeah.
are,
And you've done that more than once, I think, consistently. So that's good news. People probably don't hear. The 5307 monies, who's the they that spent it already?
Transit. So this is money that we split from the federal government between the railroad and municipality, and sometimes we're delayed in reaching that agreement, and that this year that happened. And so while we're hopeful that we get the money this year, it's more likely that we'll see it in early 2020.
Okay, can I, so is that federal calendar year too? I mean, how do they do that?
Well, it's this, we're in the current.
So
I'm
they
not-
spent this year's budget's 5307 money, but we didn't get it yet. But we'll typically we'll get it.
We
right?
will
So
get
we'll
it.
twice as much in 2020.
No,
Cover that?
no, there's an agreement, and maybe Jason would like to chime in on what the nature of that agreement is, but we reached an agreement with the railroad, how much we get, how much they get. And because we were delayed in reaching that agreement, we were delayed in making application for reimbursement. And so that has put us to a point where we may not get it this year. Most likely it will fall in early 2020. It is completely unrelated to 2020 budget or anything associated with that. I'd like to learn more, but I don't know if anyone else does. Because I know we were debating, why do they get any? Why did they get 50%, right? Because most of their work's outside of Anchorage. Are we still, and then we went 3 years without getting it because we were debating, and now we're back. I don't think we went 3 years without getting it. This is the agreement comes up every 3 years. No?
No, Jason Bockenstead, Deputy Chief Staff of the Mayor, you were absolutely correct. That is one of the arguments that we have with the railroad every single year, is about what we think is the equitable split between what the railroad share is and what the municipality share is. That was one of the reasons why it took longer this year to get it completed. But you are also correct that I believe the previous agreement was a 3-year agreement, but it also went back 2 years. So we didn't get anything for 3 years because we never reached agreement, and then 1 year we reached agreement and we were able to reach back and get the previous year's FTA money.
But now you're different. You're trying to get more than 50%.
I don't know if we're trying to get more than 50%. It's not as clear-cut as the 50-50 split, but we are making the argument that the municipality should be entitled to more of it.
Good.
Mr. Constant?
Yeah, when we were in D.C., Senator Sullivan's office's transportation staff suggested they think that we are out of line in that conversation, and that those funds were intended for the railroad and not for the municipality. And so it isn't 50-50, and it's a battle to get whatever we get.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Okay. Should we move on to the report from the Budget Advisory Commission? Okay, thank you, Mr. Slifka. Mr. Clouda?
Nolan Clouda, Chair of the Budget Advisory Commission. So our recent meeting in last week, we dedicated to reviewing the school district budget. So we had a presentation from Andy Ratliff, and gave us a pretty detailed overview of the school district budget. Probably our biggest overall concern is that the flat funding of education, and I guess which the governor's budget does flat fund education, which I guess is better than underfunding it. Even in the scenario where it's flat funded going forward, that it creates a gap as far as the actual real cost of education, and it amounts to a de facto cut. And Andy had projected that forward, showing kind of a yawning gap in what it will take to educate kids versus what revenue we're actually going to get, bound by the BSA and then the maximum contribution that the union can make. And so we definitely had some overall concern to that. That was probably our biggest thing. We are also working on we're doing a work session next Monday, actually, where we're gonna dedicate it to discussion of revenue sources. So we're going to have Moira Gallagher, that I believe many of you have spoken to, wanted to talk about the Project 20s plan, that dedicated sales tax for capital projects idea. But we're also, Mr. Bockenstead is going to talk about some of the administration's interests. And I don't know if anyone from the Assembly, I don't know if you're able to attend this, Davidson, or
I have a meeting at 12:30, so I'm not. I could try to move that. But
it's noon on Monday.
Forrest will be gone.
And Forrest is gone, I know.
Yeah.
It's noon on Monday. So if there is any Assembly interest, we definitely like some of those views.
Does anybody from the Assembly plan to go or able to go? Okay. Mayor's conference room.
We may also have tentatively Tiffany Hall from Recover Alaska speaking to the alcohol tax as well. So.
Well, and Felix has stepped out of the room, but I wonder if he might be able to do that as well, since Forrest and I aren't there. Lance, would you mind forwarding that invite you sent to Forrest and me to everyone, so they see the details, where
Absolutely.
it is, all that, and what we're talking about?
Yep, I'll do it when I get back there.
Awesome.
So we're going into this, open-minded. We're not trying to. I don't think our group has a really strongly. We've all got our opinions, of course, but I don't think we have a strongly prejudiced opinion about one proposal over another. But we do want to give different ideas a fair hearing. What comes out of it, we're we're not exactly sure whether it's a resolution or a weighting of the different options or what it might be, but we're keeping our options open on that. But, you know, we've got our eyes obviously on the ballot initiative season for April. So.
And go ahead, Mr. Wilson. And I'll.
So I'm thinking about your timing, which is actually
Yeah.
probably really good compared to typical budget advisory committee timing, where you would be analyzing that the month after we voted on it. So you're pretty good, actually. But if you look at it, Monday, we don't have a lot of time in some regards, because we have a proposal with alcohol tax and sales tax. That's like more than one may come forward, and they would be early January. So are you on a good schedule to give us feedback before we would be voting on it?
Well, the timing of it is yes, was a priority to get the session in before January. Absolutely, that was the thinking. Yes.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
But you guys are aware of needing, you know, if there were other proposals that haven't been introduced yet, that needs to happen like ASAP for us to be able to, right? Like you can't. I mean, I suppose you could introduce something January 14th and vote on the 28th, but it would be hard to probably get the support and time to educate the public and have people weigh in if we did that. So to some extent, I think we're a little late to get new things, but maybe we're not. Mr. Constant?
If I might, I think that is the order of operations. Not likely they would have a developed proposal ready to go by Friday or Tuesday of this meeting. So your last opportunity for introduction would be the 17th or 14th, 17th of January. 14th of January, so that it's heard before the end of the month. That's it. And so she's right, it's a hard lift for any of those kind of moves, but that's your only move, unless you can convince the chair to call a special meeting.
And just to clarify, when Mr. Constant just said this Friday, he's talking about the addendum, to get on the addendum for the December 17th meeting, which is next Tuesday. You could get a full ordinance and proposal, I mean, whoever wanted to, this Friday, if you had sponsors. Other than that, we're looking at you wouldn't introduce until January 14th, which would then only give you 2 weeks until a vote. So we're in major crunch time right now for anything that wants to go on the April ballot. Yeah, Pete.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was wondering, did the Budget Advisory Commission talk about the school district's bond proposal?
We did talk about capital projects. I'm trying to remember specific comments that we had. I mean, there are definitely concerns about ongoing facility costs and capital needs, but I think that we may have not been able to devote as much time to that as to the operating budget, what I recall.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. To piggyback on that, there's been some discussion about whether, I think on the school board itself, maybe Mr. Donnelly proposed that the bond be split into two, FEMA recoverable and then other. They voted against that at the school board, but there's been some discussion. I don't know if members have any interest. I don't think I do personally, but to the extent the BAC has an opinion about whether that makes sense, that would be interesting to hear.
Oh, so that was discussed actually, the FEMA versus non-FEMA. Mr. Ratliff gave us an explanation of it. I'm not recalling specific concerns or comments that we had about it. I don't think that there was a strong opinion expressed about doing that versus non-split, versus splitting versus not splitting.
Do you know, Ms. Kennedy or Mr. Dyson, is that option on the table, or did that come from Eagle River, or maybe it didn't? Maybe it's just a general concept.
I just understand from our chair that we will probably consider making a recommendation to the school board
Okay.
that they reconsider that opinion. That's what I understood our chair to say.
So in that recommendation would come out of the special meeting that we're going to have with the school board. Wasn't there discussion at our last meeting of having a work session with them? So the assembly doesn't have any position on it, just you. I mean, we're just all trying to figure it out too. But to the extent, so you don't have a regular meeting until January 8th, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so you probably wouldn't have a lot of opportunity to do that before then, so maybe that won't work, but. Okay, Ms. Salatel?
Thank you. I would be really interested to hear at some point if you guys have any opinion about the school district possibly changing to a every 2-year bond, or if you discuss that. Both in light of the bond package this year, which is heavy on earthquake-related matters, and their overall capital improvement program, because I do know we have a lot of deferred maintenance in the schools, and what that means in that deferred maintenance kind of caught up. So if you have interest in taking that issue up, it certainly doesn't have to be before maybe this particular bond vote, but as they continue to explore that moving forward.
Sure, through the chair, I'll bring that to the group and see if there are opinions expressed about it. I have heard of the idea of doing an every 2-year approach, but I don't currently have a strong opinion or one that I've heard from the others.
Okay, thank you.
Non-election year.
So we also, and also I would say on the revenue options, I think that we're not necessarily thinking about, I think we're thinking more in terms of evaluating existing ideas that are out there and providing our opinion on them more so than introducing something that's entirely new. I think that's not the way that we're thinking about it. So,
But it's entirely new if it hasn't been introduced formally in the sense of like an ordinance, then it's new in terms of the timing. So that's all, I think that's all we were trying to clarify, because you guys might not know about that set of timing.
sure. Oh, sure. That's, yeah, good point. Also, we are doing a strategic planning session in January. That's one of our annual traditions with the BAC. Is we do most of the day to strategic planning for the coming year, and so that'll be in January. I think we're still narrowing. Or do we have a date?
No.
I think we're deciding between 2 days. I think it's the 17th and the 24th of January are the two. So those have been productive for us to evaluate our priorities and kind of think about what we want to focus on. That's one too where we do benefit from assembly input, of course, and so if particularly if the finance co-chairs wanted to attend, that would certainly be a helpful thing for us.
It's either going to be the 17th or the 14th.
The 17th and the 24th, it would be Friday in the morning.
Okay, Fridays are always a little difficult for us because we have works, because you're here all the time. We have work sessions usually from 10 till 4 on Fridays. Sometimes it varies, so we'd probably be unlikely to come, but.
Yeah, we'll send the
Just
agenda
FYI.
out, and if we do it, we'll try to get an assembly member there for the first, sometime between 9 and 10.
Yeah, I mean,
for
we could
20
come,
minutes.
if you started at 10:30 or
Yeah.
we started work sessions at 10:30 or later, we could come for the first hour or something. I'd be like to do that.
So lastly, also, I was reelected as chair at our last meeting, so I'll be chair again for the next year, and then Alyssa Rodriguez as vice chair, she was reelected too. We were the two that drew the short straws. So, but I'm certainly very happy to be in that role again. So you guys will be putting up with me for a little while longer.
Great.
We appreciate you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I just want to say again, like having the BAC more involved in this process is just really helpful for us. And if members have ideas, like you just brought up, Ms. Altel, of things that the BAC could be working on, getting those to the BAC or to Nolan or to me or Boris before or Lance, the strategic session would probably be a great idea because that would shape sort of some of the things you could talk about. I know we've done that a bit over time anyway, but if you have other ideas, let me know. Yeah, Mr.
I
Cotter.
just have one for right now. Just like we did with our kind of internal strategic planning, it might be wise for us to share calendars next year and set up some benchmark meetings early so that we have the opportunities preloaded and we can fill them with the information of the year that we need to be looking at for next year. I'm not thinking about
Like
this.
assembly driven of what we need their help with in advance
Both.
or?
Yeah, but like for the budget process that we know is going to come and conclude with a request to put bonds on the ballot, that whole process, we might be wise to build a calendar for our engagement questions back and forth.
I'll just note that one of the products they give in the strategic session is they figure out what they want to do, they prioritize which order they want to do it and how much time they want to take, and then I generate a calendar by month. And so they know what they're basically going to be doing unless something comes up. So they have some predictability about what they're going to be attacking, and it's adjustable, but it's also driven on the budget and ballot measures and other things. We'll definitely share that with all of the Assembly members when that product's done.
And then I served on the BAC, as you guys know, for a little while, and I always was puzzled and brought this up when I was there, why we spent so much time getting a school district update, because I felt like we'd spend at least a third of the time every meeting just hearing how a school district's going, when that seemed like a lot of time. So anyway, just throwing that out there.
Part of their charge as the Budget Advisory Commission by code is to review not only our budget, but the school district's budget and make recommendations to both.
But that makes sense in budget season. But there's a lot of just sort of updates on what's going on and at the school district, which seems a little
we've kind of tempered them.
It's kind of a
And
time suck.
I preempt Andy and I
Great.
said, if you don't have time, if
Great.
you don't have anything to share, we need the time. And
Awesome.
they've been very generous about, we're good.
Right, that's right, is that it has actually, we've been able to keep that more restrained, and Andy's actually been very restrained too, and he still prefers to attend all of the meetings, which we welcome, but
Great,
but
yeah.
yeah, we keep that very
Okay.
truncated now, so it's been less of an issue.
Thanks, sounds good. Anything else? Should we move on to Mr. Falsey? We have an objection in the room. Does everyone want to overrule Mr. Falsey?
Just take 6 of us.
All right. Well, thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Three-part.
Pleased to have you.
On the payroll side, I have 2 forms of good news and 1 coming attraction. So the 2 forms of good news are, we mentioned in this budget season that we have reached the point where we want to start picking up everyone who has ever worked for the municipality since we turned on SAP September 11th, 2017, and look at all of their pay up until today, and then make sure they were paid correctly, and if there are mistakes, true it all up. That process has begun with the hiring of 3 pay auditors. They are currently working out of a fancily adorned conference room as we work to give them better space, but they're here, and that process is now underway for the IBEW represented NLMP employees. So that's the good news. The reality is that the first bit has been pretty slow going. That everybody's new to this, and it is taking a long time to process even 1 person. We're hoping that as we do this, we pick up the pace, but the early preview is that it's not a quick process. But it is a process that we have to do, and we're committed to it when we get done. The second bit of good news is that the system does seem to be increasingly stable. So the last payroll, we got signal from the APDEA union that the total number of pay errors for police was 17, which is less than it was back in the old PeopleSoft era. So it seems like at long last, this part of the system this part of the story is coming to conclusion. There's still, beyond paying people correctly, there are still a lot of fixes that we want to make to the system. We still have requests for change that are in the 100 and maybe 200. Some of them are nice to have, some of them are need to have, some of them we've been working around. We have had workarounds in place for a very long time. We should just do it correctly. But I'm pleased to report on that front too that we've now implemented a new system where the IT department and the SAP folks are meeting regularly with payroll to better strategize about how to more efficiently move some of those RFPs in place, and to give payroll some more IT firepower. So rather than having all the reconfiguration work being done by the SAP consultants, more of it will be done in-house. So I'm hopeful that's going to pay some more dividends. So that's sort of the state of play, where we are with the system and how the system is performing. The coming attraction is, as we have mentioned in this setting, we did have a large number of pay errors when we turned the system on, and we had a sustained number of pay errors for a very long time. We also had collective bargaining agreements that had error and pay penalties that had existed since, in some cases, 1975, which on paper created a liability that was astronomical. One of the unions said we owed them billions of dollars. As we told you guys, our strategy had been to come to some reasonable resolution. In the main consisted of, here is some additional non-cashable leave, which is, if taken, lost productivity, if cashed out at the very end because you used that rather than your cashable leave, a bill that we do have to pay, but that is not incurred all in one time, it rolls off over some period. I think we are nearing the time that we are going to be able to tell that story in fulsome detail. It was difficult to tell that story, or counterproductive to tell that story while we were still negotiating with all the various unions. And so I think it will come to pass that before too much longer, the very specific terms that we entered into with everybody will be out in the public, and we'd be happy to have a fuller work session with you guys to walk over all of that. The punchline, though, is that we took that paper liability, which everyone recognized could never be realistic because we're not going to close up shop and declare bankruptcy, and converted it into reasonable settlements, which we have been able to accommodate within our existing budget. So it hasn't been comfortable, and we've had to make a lot of hard choices, but we think we made the best out of a tough situation. And if anyone wants to dive all the way into that rabbit hole with us, I think next week we'd be probably looking to find some time with all of you, which is great because I will be in New York City, so Jason.
These guys have some questions. Just quickly, I want to ask, how could you do that? Doesn't that require some sort of appropriation? Are you moving money around for settlements or how?
We didn't, so yes, if we come into some settlements that require you to give us more money, then we have to come to you to get an additional
Or
appropriation.
even move money around? No?
So we were doing this all within the existing capabilities and the existing budgets.
Okay.
The non-cashable leave is not an immediately realizable expense. There are a few of the settlements where some people had separated, and so we said, well, we can't give you non-cashable leave, you don't work here anymore, and so there's money there, there's some money in some of the other settlements. But all of the money part was absorbable within tight management constraints within the budget you gave us. So no, this was in the nature of settling any of the lawsuits that happened in the municipal prosecutor's office or any of the lawsuits that happened in the civil section. As long as they don't require us to come back to you for more money, there wasn't a need for additional conversations.
Okay. Mr. Weddleton?
So, what I understand is the SAP, the whole pay thing is really hard for the managers to do it very time consuming. Is that still the case? So there's an additional cost that's sort of invisible to us, but it could be quite large. Is that solvable?
So several answers to that. Yes, it's still more cumbersome than it ever was before we had SAP. And the promise in the prior administration was we don't need all of these pay administrators and time administrators because they're going to be automated by this computer system. So we fired all of these relatively modestly paid folks and implemented this very expensive system, which now requires all this care and feeding from our highest paid folks. It has gotten a little better over time, but it's not as simple as it was before. And partly that was a design choice that we inherited, that the old system, you more or less record your time and tell us what it was, and then amend it all if you changed your mind, and then it came to payroll and we paid. There was some concern that that system was allowing errors to happen, in the sense, not that we were mispaying people, but that people were misreporting things. And so now we have your schedule, it's locked down in the system, you hit the time card, and if you have punched in time that does not match the schedule that's in the system, it's much more cumbersome to change the system to line up with what you actually did. I think we have kind of made our peace with the system now. We are, I mentioned that we still have these several dozen or couple hundred requests for change. Some of those are to make the system just more user-friendly because, yes, SAP in a lot of ways for the line employees is a more cumbersome system to work with. Now that said, looping all the way back to what Lance said, we are finally starting to feel some of the promised efficiencies that we started this, these 10 years ago now, in the form of Lance being able to load the budget in a click rather than over 3 days. And so we're hoping that as we sort of close out this terrible, rocky chapter of the story, that the promised future of efficiencies is really going to come to pass.
Thank you for Rocky.
Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thank you. So I have heard some palace intrigue among the parties that there are some members of different units, maybe non-reps, that are complaining about the generosity of certain settlements to this unit or that unit, and it's hard to see what the facts are until we see some kind of a big picture of all the various elements.
Yep.
Is that something that you're providing for us at some point in the future?
So like I say, next week I think we're probably going to be in a position to give you everything, all the pieces of paper. What you will see there is that one of the reasons that we weren't able to do that earlier was because the settlements are very different against the various bargaining units. And some units are very scant, and some units end up with what you might call more generous. But the facts were different in those cases because it is the case that police and fire were sort of uniquely walloped in the pay errors, that the contract language for each of the unions is very different. So some of them had, we pay you 8 hours of straight time for every undercorrect error. Some of them had $25 a day. So we had to tailor the settlements to the perceived and actual injury, to the perceived and actual paper remedy. And then the process also dictated some results because there are timelines, and some people, different unions filed different kinds of grievances in different timelines. So yes, that would have made it very difficult to resolve all of them if, as they came online, rather than publishing them in the newspaper.
So I hear you're going to hand us a big stack of the various elements. It would be really great if we could have some kind of a consumable summary on the top that helped us to crosswalk comparable, non-comparable. elements so that we're not just baffled with paper, but instead are able to make a quick assessment and then dive deeper where we're interested.
I'm sure
Thank you,
Jason would be happy to help you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason, for offering. Okay, we got a few more people. We got 5 minutes. Mr. Dyson?
Let's give me.
Okay, that's very gracious. Felix, Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think I'm pretty sure I heard Mr. Volsey say if we wanted it, we could do a work session. And so I listened to those things. And so I wrote that down. So I'll email you later about a work session so that we can look at it and you can walk us through this in a way that I think we'll understand maybe better than reading through everything. And then if we don't have any other subject, I didn't want to talk about one
Right.
thing.
In
Okay.
the other business category? Yeah, are we all good? No one has any other questions about SAP, et cetera? Okay, let's move on to E, and other business. Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just want to let the body know that I did have a conversation yesterday with the governor's budget coming out, asking the administration to give us sort of just highlights of what the budget looks like in terms of impact to the municipality. So I'm curious to see what that will look like. So look for that in the coming future. And then I guess to the administration as well, I'm curious on the mental health bill that was proposed by the governor, what that's going to do in terms of all these other levers and moving pieces. Because on face value it looks interesting, but I don't know without really understanding if that's sort of status quo, if that's anything different than the status quo.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Rivera. If there's nothing else, we'll go ahead and use our last couple minutes on audience participation. Does anybody have anything? Mr. Haberman's shaking his head no. Anybody else? Okay. This committee is adjourned.